Welcome to Not What You Were Expecting.
I was vomiting like every day, 8, 10, 12 times a day. My head was down the toilet the whole time.
A podcast about pregnancy and motherhood.
That whole process was just traumatising.
Brought to you by Elevit.
It's hard because you have to tell people and you have to tell, your staff and your parents and that you've gone through it.
I'm your host, Anika Moore. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. This episode I have boss lady extraordinaire, CEO of Tend, Cecilia Robinson. No mai hara mai, how are you?
Kia ora, lovely to have you here.
Yeah. So when she started My Food Bag, she was going through some deep personal challenges trying to have a baby. You're also a mum of 2. Tell us about your family and what's a typical day in your household look like?
So I'm a mum to 2 kids. So I've got Thomas, who's almost 9, and Layla, who's turning 5 at the end of May. Yay. And so, look, it's pretty crazy, but also we're kind of at that sweet spot where we've got a much older kid who is really independent.
Yeah.
And, you can use him to do things like take the rubbish out and empty the dishwasher. So good. I love it. So he's super independent and he's in this, cool kind of, maturing stage.
Yeah.
And then I've got my crazy whirlwind daughter who's just an absolute power dynamo, who's turning 5 and just about to start school. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
So you had au pair.
Yeah.
You had My Food Bag and you turned that into a how many $1 million
Yeah, My Food Bag's market capitalisation was close to $500 million at the start of the year.
Give me some of that. And now you've started Tend. That's a startup. You call that a startup?
It is a startup, yeah.
All the while getting pregnant with babies and raising babies. So it wasn't easy for you and James getting pregnant. Can you tell us about those early days and what you went through the first time round?
We met really young. I was really lucky because I guess what I would describe it with James is that we met when I was 20, but I felt like I'd had quite a big life before him.
Yeah.
And I was really ready to settle down. We got married when I was 23. He was 27. And in that same process, just after our wedding, I was diagnosed with SIN2.
What's SIN2?
It's pre kind of cancerous in your, I don't even know the technical terminology, but basically it's saying, look, it shouldn't impact your chances of fertility, but if you've just got married and you want to keep, start trying, then, go for it.
Yeah.
And so we started trying when I was really young. I was 24 and we clearly enjoyed practicing. So it wasn't like it was a problem to be trying for a baby.
Yeah.
And I guess I just kind of assumed because I was really young and he was really young that it would be easy and we were doing lots of practicing, so it should be fine. And it just didn't happen. And, you kind of, and then suddenly practicing doesn't become fun anymore, because it's actually for a goal and you want to have a baby and you're quite obsessed about it. And it took us probably a good year and a half before we actually went and got help. Mm-hmm. And we saw fertility associates and ultimately they kind of diagnosed us with infertility, but, it was unknown. They didn't know why we were infertile. And they started us on clomiphene, which is basically just an ovulation drug. But they hadn't proven the fact that I struggled with ovulation. Mm-hmm. In fact, they didn't think that was probably the problem. But then I fell pregnant probably off the second cycle with Tom.
Okay, so you did IVF?
No, it's like a hormone drug.
So you didn't even need to get to the IUI stage or the IVF stage?
Didn't need to do anything of that.
Oh, wow. So that's what helped you with your ovulation. It just kicked it into gear.
Yeah, and by the time we had Tom, I was 27, so it took us about 3 years before we had Tom.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an amazing journey, and we kind of felt like our pregnancy issues were solved by then, right? Because we'd had Tom, it was healthy, all of that pregnancy was a positive pregnancy, so it was really, really a good pregnancy. I looked at a lot of my cycle. I tried to look at what I was eating, exercise, trying to time the right time of the day, taking my temperature, making
You did the whole kit and caboodle.
So we totally were really committed to it. And James was really philosophical, which at times really annoyed me because he'd be like, oh, darling, we're going to have babies and it will be fine. And of course he's right? Yeah. But at the time it really didn't feel like that. And so you go through that phase and, you're really trying hard to get pregnant and it doesn't happen. And we were really lucky to have Tom after that. And so it was, it wasn't an easy journey, but we had a healthy baby from it.
How did you feel through all of it? What were your emotions doing?
I think the biggest thing was, and I think you can sit on 2 ends of the spectrum, I felt because I was so young, really cheated out of the fact that I didn't enjoy the process. Mm-hmm. Because, you're young, it should be easy, you should just get pregnant, you've got married, you have, and it just didn't work. But at the same time, I felt lucky in the fact that I knew that we had time, that we had the benefit of time. And so if we didn't get pregnant, we could go through IVF, we could adopt, and we discussed that. We had a pathway. I think if you're older, and you start and you find out when you're 35 that you're struggling with fertility, your pathway is so much shorter.
Your options are limited.
And your options options are limited, and so it's a different pathway. And so while it felt tough for me, I also had perspective on the fact that it was a lot tougher for a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And so we were really lucky.
And what kind of pregnant person were you?
I loved being pregnant with Tom. I thrived on tracking it every week and knowing exactly the size of the baby and just being being totally committed to the process and feeling really connected to him and committed to a natural birth.
Yeah.
But then I started going quite over with Tom, and so they actually scheduled me in for a planned C-section.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went into labour, and I was like, oh wow, I'm actually going to have this baby and it's going to be natural, and that's really exciting. And then it was really bad, the pain was really bad, and I've got a really high pain threshold, so it scared James quite a bit. And by the time I got into hospital, I was only like 2 or 3 centimetres dilated.
And you're in a lot of pain.
And in a lot of pain, and I was only 2 or 3 centimetres dilated for about 20 hours, despite them trying to do everything to escalate the pregnancy. So it ended up as an emergency C-section, and it started getting dangerous towards the end of it. I think psychologically, because ultimately even if I wanted a natural birth, I was open for all options. Mm-hmm. I was open about the fact that I was happy to whatever outcome was the right outcome at the time. And so it wasn't necessarily a surprise for me, even if I wanted something different,
Were you traumatised by it?
I've got quite a good I'm quite emotionally resilient, and I kind of compartmentalised that part of it. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, I look at the circumstances of what happened and I go, well, these were the things that happened, and next time I'm going to prevent them. We ended up with the midwife that wasn't the lead midwife on the day. So the person we'd spent 9 months building a relationship with was not the person who showed up. And the other midwife, it was so annoying. And the other midwife had quite different values from me and really pushed for the natural birth. And by the 20-hour mark, the obstetricians were stepping in and they were like, no, we should have been doing this, we need to be moving along. And I kind of looked at that and I went, okay, next time I'm going to be doing this differently.
Yeah.
And so I kind of understand the variables that were creating the problems that I see in hindsight, and I go, okay, well, how do I prevent that next time?
So you tried for another baby, so tell us about that.
Well, no, it was actually really funny because we went through this phase where we'd had Tom, it was really problematic, and because it took us so long to have Tom, we never went on birth control. And I remember being in our bedroom and my husband looking at me and going, your boobs are amazing, he's like, they're huge. And I'm like...
Oh, you're like, oh!
And then he's like, honey, you just don't look right. And I was like, what are you trying to say here? But he was like, I'm pretty sure that you're pregnant.
Wait, so he called it?
He called it. He just looked at me and he's like, I'm pretty sure you're pregnant. Wow. And he's like, when's your period due? And I was like, I can't remember. I wasn't tracking it. I'd had Tom and been breastfeeding, and he's like, you just... something's not right, honey.
You look ripe.
Yeah, and so I did. I went and took a pregnancy test, and I was shocked to find out that he was right and I was pregnant. And we were like, wow, we hadn't even been trying. This is totally unexpected. I hadn't even, before I was planning my period down to the day and the minute, and I knew when it would come and it would really upset me.
Yeah.
And this felt just amazing and spontaneous and real, and just we were just so delighted.
How did you feel? You said before you're a self-confessed control freak. How did that feel for you? Were you like, wait, I have to get all my ducks in an order?
Yeah, I think I was a little bit scared because I didn't want to have children so close in age. Mm-hmm. And at a business level, we were launching my food bag in Australia.
Jesus. Okay.
We were selling OPL Link. We were still building my food bagging in New Zealand. We were still running OPL Link. And so we had all these priorities, and probably the timing wasn't the best. And we were just about to move to Australia. And I became really sick in that pregnancy. And so I was vomiting every day, 8, 10, 12 times a day. My head was down the toilet the whole time. But really early on, we found out, it was about 12 weeks when we found out we were having a daughter. Yeah. And so it just felt right. And so when we fast forward, we had all of the regular scans. When we moved to Australia, we started seeing an obstetrician there who at the time we believed was really amazing. They were listening to her heartbeat, and, we went in for a regular 20-week scan, and we were a little bit late, and we found out that the baby, hadn't made it. She wasn't there anymore, and she'd been there the week before, and we'd listened to her heartbeat, and suddenly we went from having... and you have at 20 weeks, you are pregnant, you've told everybody, you're expecting to give birth, you've bought clothes. In fact, we'd moved to Australia and I only had a maternity wardrobe, and so that whole process was just traumatizing, it was...
So we're talking 20 weeks and no heartbeat.
No heartbeat.
And what, did they know why?
on all of the tests that you could run in advance, she'd been really low, like in terms of like there were low probability of any risks. She was perfectly formed. There was nothing wrong with her, and so it was really hard to justify. And so our obstetrician kind of said to us in the end, he was like, well, must have been something catastrophically wrong for it to abort so late, for the baby to abort so late in the pregnancy. And so it's lightning doesn't strike twice, and it shouldn't make you guys feel concerned, and you just keep going.
Keep going. Yeah. What do you mean keep going? What does that mean?
Well, if you want to have another baby, just try for it again, was kind of the sentiment.
How do you deal with the grief?
I think I deal with grief through action. Like, I have to come up with a plan and understand why. Mm-hmm. And we felt really reassured after we lost the first baby that it was lightning doesn't strike twice, and they did the full autopsy or the full analysis of the baby after she was born, and they basically said, look, we can't find anything, but we do believe that there must have been something. You're really fortunate that you haven't had her, because maybe there might have been other issues that you wouldn't have been able to identify, but what they could see was a healthy baby. And so they said, look, you should try again. So the second time it took us a little bit longer to get pregnant, and we went down the same route as we did with Tom, which was we used clomiphene.
Yep.
And in my head, I liked the fact that it was the same process as Tom, because it felt safe and it felt like we'd done that before and we'd had a successful pregnancy. And at about 13, 14 weeks, I felt unwell. And I went and saw our obstetrician at that point, and they did a scan and they said, everything's fine. Don't be concerned, but we'll book you in for a reassurance scan in between, because at 12 weeks again, we'd found out it was a girl again.
Yeah.
And they said, well, look, we will scan you at 17 weeks this time.
Yeah.
Because, you've got longer, you don't have to wait as long for the 20-week scan. And so I remember going into Insight Radiology with like a little referral form which says reassurance scan. Mum's had lost a baby before, and this is just to give her comfort. Like, it was literally written on the referral.
Wow, okay.
And then we went in and we saw the radiologist, who was amazing, and he turned on the screen, put the probe on the belly, and he was like, holy hell. He told it like it was. It was really clear that this was a no-show.
Yeah.
That was, it was traumatising, it was really hard. And it was hard, it's hard because you have to tell people, and you have to tell, your staff and your parents, and that you've gone through it. And, I just know that for us, there's just no guarantee that we're going to have a baby until we're kind of like, until the baby's actually there, right?
Yeah, until it's in your arms.
And what happened with the two girls that we had was the first baby was on the 29th of June 2014, and the second baby we lost on the 30th of June 2015.
Yeah.
And so it was just within a day of each other, and it just felt so... I remember saying Layla was due in June, and I just said, I'm not having a June baby. Like, you have to take her in May. I just refused to. But James, remember, he got me, for our anniversary, he gave me a ring that's got a pink stone in it, and then 2 diamonds on the side. And I remember him saying, the diamonds are for the girls that we lost, and the pink is for the girl we're going to have.
Yeah.
And so I think he's always been my rock through it, but he's really an emotional guy.
And he literally gave you a rock.
Yeah, he literally gave me a rock. So he literally has been my rock. Yeah.
Hey, we're just going to take a break, but this is so interesting and I feel very emotional actually. And we'll come right back after these. Now's a good time for me to tell you about Elevit. The first 6 to 8 weeks of pregnancy are so important for your baby. Even if only the size of a kidney bean, it's a time when their vital organs are growing, so you want to make sure you're in good health. Taking Elevit at least 1 month before you start trying can build up the essential nutrients you need from the day you conceive. Always read the label and follow the directions for use. Vitamin supplements are supplementary too, and not a replacement for a balanced diet. No mai haere mai, we're back with Cecilia Robinson, and we've been talking about pregnancy. We're going really deep. At the time you had young children and were dealing with the loss of your babies, you were also running a new company, My Food Bag. Did you have days when you felt like you were struggling to cope?
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're not honest about that, you have to be honest and open about the struggles you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. And especially, when we lost our first baby, we were in Australia and we had a new team there. And, we rocked up to the team and we had to tell them in person and what we were going through. And in New Zealand, it's really hard to hide that you're pregnant in My Food Bag. It's the worst place to be pregnant, because if they're cooking salmon at 9 o'clock in the morning and you're vomiting in the bathroom.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like it's pretty obvious. And so when I got pregnant that second time and we lost the second baby, everyone knew that I was pregnant. And I remember James and I talking about it and saying, and it was post-surgery, but we went in together. And so we went in together and we took Tom with us. And we gathered our team and we said, look, team, this is really challenging. And everyone has personal challenging times, you know, and we have to go for it together and we have to be open about it.
Yeah.
And we're not going to pretend like we're not hurting or that we can cope, you know. But we have our family and we have each other and, you know, really open to talking to you guys about problems that you have.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and look, it was hard and I needed a lot of, I think for me, again, it came down to a plan and an action to actually go, okay, well, we still want to see another baby. And now we've had this experience several times. And so how are we going to have another baby? How is this actually going to happen? So for Layla, what actually happened was that I decided I refused to go through the same process as we'd had the two prior times.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky to be referred through to the high-risk maternity unit at Auckland Hospital, who's got a fantastic doctor there, Dr. Groom. She is a rock star and a legend in my view. And she wasn't the first. She was the first person that kind of said to me, I've seen this before. And so Dr. Grimm put me on blood thinners and said, you know, okay, let's try with blood thinners and see how we go. And, you know, I think that's going to make a big difference. And so, and then she scanned me every week.
Every single week?
From about 12 weeks, they scanned me every week.
And what were your feelings? Were you nervous, anxious, scared,
Yeah, I mean,
worried?
I don't like the scan. I think that it's a tough process to go through. When you've seen a baby that's not moving on one of those, I literally tell them to turn it off because I just don't want to see it until we know it's a heartbeat.
Yeah, heartbeat first, then
yeah,
let's
and then
see the
you
baby.
can turn it on. Yeah, so let's go through that process. And so Katie was amazing, and she ultimately did the planned C-section for Layla.
Yeah.
And to be able to have someone through that actually really understands the process and what you've been through was incredible. Like, she's amazing.
So you're onto your fourth pregnancy with Layla. Mm-hmm. And every week you're going...
Well, every day, I remember, you obsess about it. It's every single waking moment you stop and you think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And even as she got bigger in the belly and she starts moving, you start getting paranoid when she's not moving. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until Layla was here that I was like, oh, we actually have a baby.
Yeah.
I refused to talk to James about names, or I basically delayed everything from a getting organised perspective as long as I could. Yeah. Which is really not like me because I like being organised.
But understandable.
But in this instance, I was like, oh, I don't even know if we're having a baby. And so I keep saying if, if we have this baby, if it happens.
Well, Layla's kicking and...
Yeah.
How was her birth?
Because it was a planned C-section, it was kind of like going in for a haircut.
Oh, great, yeah.
Yeah, I totally encourage a planned C-section.
Push to push? Is that what they say?
It was so good. But then again, James will tell the story about how, how much, blood is involved and, how our daughter came out and she wasn't actually breathing properly for the first 15 to 20 minutes. Jeez. And also he refused to tell me that. And so...
He refused? While this is happening, he's like,
no,
it's all good.
So he was like, they literally, I said, can I see her? Because initially she cried and then she went quiet. And then I was like, oh, can I see her? Can I hold her? He's like, no, darling, you just have to wait until they've sewn you up and da-da-da-da-da. And it was different because it was so different from Tom.
Yeah.
And he literally, he went over and saw her and he's got the photos where she is purple and she's not breathing and they bring in the paediatrician. Okay. But I didn't know any of this because they were still sewing me up.
Yeah.
But then the paediatrician got her breathing and she got all of her colour back and then they gave her back to me. So it took him it took him quite a while before he told me what actually happened. So having Layla was amazing.
Well, you work really, really hard. We've spoken to lots of working mums who've experienced guilt for feeling like they weren't doing enough for their kids. Where do you sit with that?
We're really lucky in the fact and privileged that we've got financial freedom and that we did retire. We decided that we didn't want to keep working at the same pace that we were and that we wanted to be always there for our kids. And we've always been hands-on parents. We've always fitted our work around our kids. Mm-hmm. So we've been the ones that pick up from kindy and school, and we've been really lucky in that sense. But then it's meant that we push ourselves really hard. Mm-hmm. So from when the kids go to bed at 7, we'll be working past midnight to make sure we get in those 5 or 6 hours that we missed in the day,
Yeah.
And so we decided that we'd retire and because we had choice and we didn't have to work, right? Which sounds amazing on the surface. But what both of us quickly realised was that we needed to redefine our purpose and do something that was meaningful for us.
Yeah.
And do something that we love. And we still have got so much to give and so many things that we can, really that we can give back to, society. And so we decided to pick up working again and to, start Tend, which is a huge commitment.
I actually have to say I've used Tend twice in the last 6 weeks, so it's
great.
been amazing.
It's just about access and equity and making sure, that we're delivering a better healthcare experience for people. It came from experiences with the healthcare system where, the second pregnancy loss that we had should have been diagnosed. If someone had probably picked up and looked at what my problems were, there was a bare minimum expectation of care that should have been provided, which wasn't. And I just don't want anyone to ever have to go through that again. And both James and I have been driven to change that. But it does drive parental guilt because, of course, I'm picking actively to be working instead of taking my daughter to the zoo on a Thursday or, organising a play date for her, or whatever it is, because she goes to kindy and she sees my parents. But at the same time, I think children do need to have that balance of, other people in their life. It's really amazing for them to get impact from other people. So, but we are always there. We're very family orientated. We always have breakfast together. We always have dinner together. We always, our kids will tell you that we're there at bath time, we're there at bedtime. And if we're not, they're quite offended and it's a big deal, They
kick out. You're there when it counts and matters, right?
Yeah, for
and
all
you
of
work
us.
hard for them.
For all
well.
of us. But yeah, mum guilt is real and I think dad guilt is real too. And I'm really lucky in the sense that I've got a husband who not only adores his children, but is really present. He is there for them and he's there just as much as I am. And I think from a shaping perspective and who they are as people, I think it's really important, I didn't work so hard at my career to stop contributing, but I also didn't have children not to raise them, So those two things have to somehow work in unison.
I totally get it. A lot of people will be listening to this who may be going through similar things trying to get pregnant. What advice would you give them?
My advice would be, if you're struggling to get pregnant, don't spend too much time on Dr. Google. Actually go and see a real life doctor, go and see your GP, come and see Tend, come and see whoever it is that's appropriate for you to see to talk about your fertility. I think that it drives a lot of stress if we don't know what's going on. And it can be as simple as having a conversation with a GP about it to better understand your period or ovulation or be able to give them the tools to track. I think when we start just asking Dr. Google, we get so many different answers and it's not helpful. And we're not medical professionals. We haven't spent 10 years becoming medical professionals. So you have to actually ask the right people for advice.
What advice would you give to mothers who have actually gone through the same thing that you've gone through, with grief and with losing a baby? What would be the...
Well, fundamentally, it's just you just want to embrace people and say, I'm sorry, it's not something that you ever wish on anyone. It's not something that you wish on, your worst enemy. It is a horrible process and you have to be able to reconcile that pain. You have to be able to allow yourself to grieve, and lean into people. I think that when we lost the babies, my food bag is an example, I can't remember how long they fed us for, but our development kitchen literally just kept providing us with meals so I didn't have to cook for a month, right?
It's kind of handy, eh?
Just accepting help from people and just having that support network is really important. But, just really, and whether it's, losing kind of that early spark of a dream with a miscarriage at 6 weeks or, the catastrophic circumstance of losing a baby later on during a pregnancy, you got to give yourself the time to breathe and to grieve.
Yeah.
But also, if you're like me, I really needed solutions. I was like, I can either sit and I can, feel really sorry for myself and I've got the right to do that, but at the same time, I actually just want to understand why and how I can do differently next time. And that's why asking for help is so important,
Man, that was so amazing. Thank you so much for being our guest today. A big thanks to Elevit and Menevit for supporting the show and for supporting all the Kiwi parents out there. Make sure you're subscribed to the show on your podcast app